So yeah, the idea is I had a talk with Frank about a week ago. Frank and Paul, my roommates, and they were talking about practical application of what I was saying, my conception of patriarchy, and I was saying the office of man versus the office of woman. So explaining what that means. The office of man is the role of taking executive ownership and responsibility over the holistic well-being of self, family, and humankind. And the reason why it's all three of those is, or the reason why it's humankind as well, is because you can't care for even your family unless you account for all of society, because your family will engage and encounter with society. Um, so it's necessary to have influence over humankind because that's the environment in which your family engages. And in order for your family's growth, holistic growth to progress, the relationships with other human beings needs to progress as well, and thus their own individual holistic well-being needs to be accounted for. Um, so the office of woman is simply to help provide any and all help needed for the office of man. So separating the person from the role, separating the man from the office, the woman from the office, and getting people to focus on the office and respecting and building personal character around the fulfillment of the office. Um, Rather than focusing on individuals doing X, Y, and Z, but rather looking at the office doing X, Y, and Z. We basically have done this when we went from in America from a monarchy to a presidency. In a monarchy where the king is the ruler, he personally is the ruler. So his personal relationships and his personal being is inseparable from the nation rulership. In fact, that's why then the next one in line would be either the son, the eldest son, or the queen, because those are personal relationships. So when you tie the rulership of a nation to a person, then the rulership of the nation is transferred on the basis of personal relationship, the queen or the eldest son. Um, Obviously, we know what can happen with that. When you have a presidency, then you are completely separating the role of the nation's leader from the individual person. And so the succession of leadership is that the role stays intact, but the occupant of the role will change, like the presidency. So when you go from king to queen, for example, then that's actually a different office who's now ruling the nation, um, until she, say, marries, and then it will be her husband as king. Whereas there really is no equivalent of that. Well, there slightly is with the vice president and the speaker of the house, but that's only in the case of an emergency. It's kind of temporary, but by and large, the normal typical situation is that there's the presidency, and then different people, individuals will occupy that office. So we have a very clear separation in our minds in modern society, or at least Western society, of the role and the person, and what it means to respect the one versus the other. In fact, this even kind of came up. I don't mean to rant, but this kind of came up with Trump, with the various situations have been happening under his presidency, where they were saying, should the attorney general defend the office of the president, or should the attorney general defend Donald Trump, the person? Because there's been controversy. You still there?
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. I don't see you. Um, it looks like the video feed stopped on my end as well, so I can't. It's like a still shot of you. Either that, or you have a really good ability to stay still. Um, So, and that question is kind of illuminates the difference between the office of president and the versus the occupant of the president, and you know what it means to defend the one versus the other. So that's kind of what I'm driving at. So when I am advocating for patriarchy, it's um, a non it's not a traditional form of patriarchy as I understand it. And so the highest offices that exist within humanity would be the office of man and the office of woman, and every other human institution would be subordinate um, to those two offices. So that would be government, religion, if that's even needed at all, education, business, every aspect of human society, every institution, I should say, a human institution would be subordinate to the office of man and the office of woman. And so, are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So the function of the office of man and the office of woman is basically to provide the infrastructure, the social order that allows the human race to create a a new human experience or a new world order. So if you want to create a new world order, and there's an endless cycle of creating a new world order. It's just a healthy progress of things. And when you need to create a new world order, you need a social order that will allow you to do that in a way that is peaceful. And so basically, patriarchy is a sustainable, holistic, scalable social order that allows for the creation of a new world order. So if you always want to be in a position to create a new world order, patriarchy is the social structure, the social order that's able to do that sustainably.
So is
So thank you.
I mean, are you trying to convince for the Soul Brunch, like this is discussion prep for that. Are you trying to convince individuals that patriarchy is the most efficient way to sustain humanity?
I'm not saying it's the most efficient. I'm saying it's the only way. That is holistic, sustainable, and scalable.
Okay, so you're saying, are you trying to convince people that it's the only way to sustain humanity?
Well, it's not just sustain. Like I'm being specific. I'm saying these three criteria. Because right now humanity isn't even sustainable in any sense, right? So it's not like we already have a sustainable way, and I'm advocating for something else. We don't have a way of sustainable living, and on in any way, from a physical standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, mental, emotional, etc. So what I'm saying is, if human beings are made to live in holistic integrity, sustainably, um, that's both individually and as a collective. It logically follows that you need a mechanism to recreate um, the human the social order of human beings in a way that um, facilitates that allows that to happen. um, Patriarchy satisfies that requirement right now. um, it's the only social order that satisfies that requirement.
I guess what I would question is, can patriarchy be any being in that office?
No.
What from what you described as far as the office
Hmm.
being taking care of the holistic welfare of self, family, and humanity, Um, why wouldn't any type of being be suitable for that office?
Right. So the occupant of the office would have to be a being that's a conscious being that lives a lifestyle of progressive holistic integrity. So what that means is there's an objective way to discern who is designed to occupy that office, and it has to do with um, reproduction. So as a human being, the greatest value we can create is our own kind, holistically. So that would include physical reproduction. Um, so that being the case, um, if physical with the physical reproduction, that requires a biological man and biological woman. So between those two, the office needs to be fulfilled within that relationship so that all parties are living the proper human experience. So that would mean either the man is taking ownership and responsibility over the welfare of the mother, or the woman is taking ownership of the welfare of the man. And when children come into play, the woman is not in a position to take ownership of the man's well-being because her priority is the well-being of the child, because the needs of the child is greater than the needs of the father. Um, so for that, the man, on the other hand, that logic doesn't apply. When the child comes into play, he is still able. He's simply able to take ownership of the well-being of mother and child. So biology gives us an objective measure, um, an objective indicator to know who is supposed to fulfill the office of man and who is supposed to fulfill the office of woman. The office of man is fulfilled by the biological male. The office of woman is fulfilled by the biological female. So we have an objective indicator, um, and that's it.
So if one manipulates, I'm just throwing things out there. If one manipulates the biology, are they not? If it's sheerly biology and a conscious being and biological physical form, can't one just manipulate the physical form?
Right. So the very act of manipulating the physical form is not an act of living in progressive holistic integrity. To manipulate your form is to say that the previous form was deficient in some form or fashion, and the new form is better in some form or fashion. Since the value of biological male and biological female are of equal value, it is irrational to do that, and therefore such an action is not an act of progression in holistic integrity, and therefore such an action is not a human action. It's not proper human behavior. So if somebody engages in that behavior, we wouldn't change our understanding of the social order of human beings based upon self destructive behavior.
So to what degree, I'm just going to follow this line, but what degree of change alters those conditions to where one is suitable to be physically adept for that for that position. So if some sort of chemistry change happens to a subset of humans of human males, let's just say, what I mean, are they no longer eligible to be men? The office of men? Like if something changed within them biologically to some degree, how is that not, and they weren't born that way, let's just say, how much of the biological biology is because if you're evolving, let's say, how much of the biology is that makes you eligible, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So the logic is that the biology produces a certain experience, and that experience makes the one biological form eligible for the one office, and it makes the other biological ineligible for that same office. So it's the biology dictates the experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that experience either makes you eligible or ineligible for the office of man. And so by process of elimination, if only one biological form produces an experience that allows you to be eligible for the office of man, it logically follows then the other biological form is suited for the other office. So when you talk about, well, what happens when there's a change in biological form, the question is what inherent experience, or what is the, if the biological form changes, what is the new function? What is the new function for that new biological change? And that new function determines the new experience, and then you're basically running the same logic. But if there's a artificially or human induced change in biological form, now we're going back to should that change have happened in the first place? Was it an act of progressing in holistic integrity? If so, then we have to include the intent within that whole thought process. If it wasn't a human induced thing, then we have an interference with human affairs. And then we have to look at what is the nature of that interference. So we're basically going through the same process. We're just taking into account the source of change, or the reason for a change.
Okay, so I would think that we would have to be quite aware of ourselves, our bodies, and ourselves.
And as conscious beings, yep.
I mean, as not only as individuals, but as a whole, species, so to speak, a whole being group, that we would have to be pretty, very closely monitoring or aware of our biology, as well as, like you said, the other aspects of emotional, mental, consciousness, and other faculties and things.
Yes. And I would argue that as a conscious being, that's more than reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a progressive thing too, right? That's part of the progressive holistic integrity, is that our understanding holistically grows.
Okay.
As it should.
So I want to kind of shift gears. So I know we had we touched on this before in a previous discussion that led to this even wanting to talk about this topic. But
Hmm.
okay, so let's say we have the offices of man and woman for humanity as um, the top. What did you say? The top. Did you say? How did you phrase it? It was like the top institutions or the top
I
way.
just offices, the highest offices.
Oh, the high. Okay, yeah, the highest offices for humanity.
Hmm.
Um, and so you're okay. So then, with what you're, I feel giving more of a rationale to why patriarchy is the only design, if you will, order for humanity. Um, I think, as you said, the holistically sustainable, to have holistic, sustainable, scalable
Yep.
existence for humanity.
Yeah.
So what I going back to a previous conversation we had, what I would wonder is I want to touch on. So why do we need? I understand you stated the patriarchy. Why would a woman's office be necessary? Um,
Yes.
why
Okay.
wouldn't you? Why couldn't a man, a human man being, why couldn't a man just be self-sufficient? Okay, just be self-sufficient and sufficient in that office, in and of itself, to basically be humanity. For those, that type of that sustainable, holistic, scalable humanity. Why wouldn't just uh, the office of men be necessary?
Yeah, the office is because we're a creation. And a creation means that we don't know everything at any point in time. We don't know everything that we need to know in order to live according to design, as beings that live in holistic integrity or even progressive holistic integrity. And so as a created being, we will always be in a state of growth, which means there's always something that we're doing, not like evil, but just incorrectly, making mistakes. Um, when you make a mistake, you are not experiencing, um, yeah, when you make a mistake, you aren't experiencing intimacy with God. You're not experiencing, because a mistake is a contradiction ultimately. And when you experience a contradiction, that experience is not an experience of deeper connection with God because there's a contradiction, which means God is not present. So that is inherent to being a created being. So growth is inherent to the experience, and therefore that creates a problem. That creates an inherent hole. So the response is that in the experience of growth and mistakes, not that you'll be like devastated by a mistake, but the point is that it's not is in of itself, it's not a constructive experience. If you have someone who's helping you, if you have someone whose job is to be present in the gap, somebody whose job is to bring about, yeah, to be present in the gap and therefore to bring integrity to where there is not, then what you have is a holistic experience, a holistic experience where now God is engaged in the entire process of progress. So the office of woman is to fill that gap, to make the experience of uh, I don't want to say imperfection, but I want to say more or less the experience of imperfection perfect. The experience of mistake to be growth and learning. Without that, you actually would be living in contradiction, because it would not be true that at all points in time God is um, engaged with the humankind. So if it was only the office of man, and there were only those individuals who serve in the office of man,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to over explain at this point, so I'll just maybe let you respond.
Well, my first thought too was, well, okay, so that's an assumption that we are created beings. Um, I mean, my just for argument's sake, if you don't believe that, if one doesn't believe that we're human beings are created beings, um, and therefore we don't need to continuously progress to any given thing, um, or we're self fulfilled. Um, Again, then you know, I would almost look at an evolution standpoint. If you just think is there even a possibility that this, with the patriarchy system, that again questioning the woman's office, that a woman's office would become obsolete, because if you don't think that believe that human beings were created, then couldn't humanity or the beings of that hold the male office just say, I think that, we just need to just be men, you know, and then just self evolve without the need of women.
Well, let's take a let's take. I'm going to encourage us, and let me know if this is going to be counterproductive for
Mm-hmm.
for you or even this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why I'm trying to like brand and push office of man and office of woman. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying no need for women, I would say, is there still a need for the office of woman?
Okay. Okay. Good point. So
Uh,
the
'Cause-
office of women.
right.
Would there no longer be a need for the office of women if the office of men has basically evolved so much to the point? If you well, basically, if you don't believe that
So you're saying the office of
humans.
man, right? So you're really saying if the office of man matures, so
Mm-hmm.
the understanding of what the office of man entails, could they, so right? So over time, the understanding of what the office of man entails, we'll say
Mm-hmm.
the wisdom of the office of man,
Mm-hmm.
that wisdom improves so much
Yeah.
that the office of man becomes, or at least seemingly, or may, is it possible it can become a self-sufficient office?
Yes. Yeah. I
Okay.
guess that's what
Uh,
I'm
that
asking.
is, yeah, and that kind of, I believe that kind of goes back to, well, almost goes straight back to the Garden of Eden in terms of the deception, is that for a created being, it is impossible for you to ever be in a state where you don't need new information from God. And as long as you need new information from God, you don't, the maturity, the cycle of maturity, as I understand it. So the answer is no. That's my answer. But to explain is that the cycle of maturity requires a realization that you need new information from God. The realization that you need new information from God, in my understanding, is essentially just making a mistake. That's how you come into awareness that you need new information from God. I don't think it's possible to proactively know that you need new information from God, because if you proactively knew that, you technically already have that information. So realizing that you need new information from God requires a mistake, and that experience of a mistake is not the end of the world, but it's also not a God present experience. And what makes it a God present experience is a office that fills that specific gap, that makes that experience a positive, constructive experience. And that would have to be someone who's not in that office. That will have to that would be that fundamentally is not a part of the office. That experience of mistake.
Okay. So then,
Yeah.
well, okay. So could that office, can you simulate the being that holds the office? So I guess what I'm looking, we're all around us, everything's going towards this AI, artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
So couldn't something like a virtual assistant, be something along those lines of a virtual being that would, let's just say, okay, so then the office of woman would need to be there for those reasons that humanity needs continuous information from God, new information from God. And so something like an artificial intelligent being that took the role, let's say, of either male or either men or women, why would that be feasible? Would that work?
The intelligence of this other creation would be a lower intelligence than that of a human. And so what I'm saying is that a human always fills the office of man and the office of woman. You're saying, what if a non-human, though intelligent entity
Mm-hmm.
fills the office of man or woman?
Mm-hmm.
Because the office of man and woman is relevant to the proactive um, the proactive and intentional continuity of humankind. Um, a a a lower level creation, a lower intelligence creation, just it literally doesn't even understand what it means to be human. It does not understand what it means to be human. That's what it boils down to.
Okay.
So yeah. And it not only does it, it couldn't. It has no relationship, it has no personal relationship with God, so it couldn't know what it means to be human.
Okay. And then okay, so then humanity also doesn't need just God alone. So let's just say the patriarchy system. But then you have the male office. So the, in the male experience, human male experience, for instance, there couldn't be just God that is basically the one that is there when during the male human experience and giving the new information, and then as mistakes are made, why would God himself not be sufficient enough for the male office as opposed to needing requiring a female office, a woman office.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why couldn't God fill that gap?
Yeah, yeah.
Because by definition, well, I guess I'm thinking of two things. By definition, the gap is a gap of experience of God. So the experience is the experience of a gap of connection with God. Not like you're at odds with one another. It's a moment of disconnect. So by definition, if God's not by definition, God's not directly engaged. And so what he is doing is he is indirectly engaged with the complementary office, the supportive office.
So are you almost saying, so just what came to mind, is it almost like a delegated office in a sense? The
Yes.
the woman office, is that almost like God delegated that? Or I guess you could look at it both ways, that God delegated the man office and he delegated the woman office to
Yes.
humanity, basically,
Yes. Yes.
humankind.
That would be a concise way of putting it. That's a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Oh. So let me see. Um, so in the terms of delegation, so let's just go with almost like, we with like business and the professional world and leadership and things like that we understand too. Is there essentially, if it is just a means of delegation for human beings, the human race, how would you describe through that delegation process, how would you describe the patriarchy system as being the only system for uh, human beings to be progressively integral?
Uh, so I'm sorry, I didn't fully
Well, how
understand the question.
I'm sorry. So I almost want to know, what's the point of human beings then? I mean, because so then I'm just backing it up to, what, I guess, just human purpose, period. So I mean, I know you're talking about the office of, patriarchy being um the only way for humans to be holistic, sustainable, and scalable as a species, as a being.
Mhm.
Um, so what is the being? I would think you would also just have to know, what is the being supposed to be doing? Like, what is the being?
Yeah. The being, and the being would be a creation of God for the purpose of God having a beloved creation, and therefore a lovable creation, and therefore made in the image, God's image, which means the way we live and our nature of being is similar to God's, but not exactly the same. So God is a one of a kind, literally. We are a kind of being that mirrors um, God's nature and God's lifestyle. And therefore, we do live in progressive, holistic integrity, learning beings, learning conscious beings, whereas God isn't progressively in holistic integrity. He is like the literal meaning of holistic integrity, or he simply is holistic integrity of being outside of time. Um, and self-defining, self-determining, and so we inherit those attributes. We are self-determining beings. Um, we are technically self-defining beings to an extent. Um, that's why we can change our physical form. So to an extent, we are made to live eternally. So we don't live outside of time, but we do live eternally. Um, unlike other creation. Um, and so, yeah, we just kind of understand who God is and understand what it means for us to be a reflection of that, a created reflection of that, which is a cycle, uh, a continuous cycle of levels of understanding. Um, so that's why we exist and what is our nature.
And then, so with why we exist in our nature, patriarchy. Are you patriarchy?
That has to do with so the way we live and the way we interrelate should be designed to respect our individual being, which is a being in the image of God and therefore lives in progressive holistic integrity, and in self-determination will be the biggest thing. Self-determination through progressive holistic integrity. So we need to create an environment which includes our social environment, which respects that, which means it must be the case that we are designed to live as such. So we use reason to discover that design. And then we respect that design. So that that discovery and respect is a continuous cycle of learning.
Okay. Um, I mean, I definitely think that people would have different. I think that what the main thing would be is if people are open to thinking and reason.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that would be the biggest barrier as far as having a understanding or maybe more of an agreement. Um, yeah, is what I would think for as far as the soul brunch. I would think that either you're not you, but uh, someone would not be open to the rationale, or they understand the rationale and they just reject it. It's just my initial thoughts. But then what I would wonder is, well, what's your alternative too for humanity? If that's not the structure, if that's not the structure or design system, then what do you offer? What would an individual offer if they don't agree with patriarchy? What would they offer that would allow humanity to be what it's designed to be? That's why I feel like an understanding human purpose and what human beings are is critical. So that would be my question to an alternative to patriarchy, the system of patriarchy. What is the alternative that would be equal, if not better?
Right, and that's the in my view, from my perspective, that's the only question I'm willing to entertain. And
Oh, the one that I just asked.
yeah, so if somebody's going to reject what I'm putting on the table, that's the only conversation I'm willing to entertain. show me equal or better.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't show me equal or better, then why are we resisting this?
Right. Right. I mean, if we're talking about solutions, we want, we're talking about things working, making things working. And, so that's where my thinking would be. So I think we're on the same page as that, as far as that goes. What do you offer something that's equal or better? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a good title. Gender roles re-examined. So I think you got to use. On the one hand, I want to use kind of the traditional language. I mean, not the traditional, but the standard language used around these things versus wording it in a thought-provoking way.
I almost feel like just straight out like how when we had our previous conversation, like why do we need it's not bashing, but it's like it's just seriously just wanting to know why do we need men? Why do we need women? Like it's just or just, like or even just you could I mean, I asked why do we need women, but I guess the office of women is what you're talking about. But almost like what we talked about before in that previous conversation of like I even brought up I think can't men just have like a puppy like to feel better during their mistakes but it's almost like it's like do men just really need a puppy or do men just need a virtual assistant you know do men it's almost like
Yeah, and I think what makes it even clearer. First of all, I think when you even the first time you asked me, I think those are great questions because no one really asked me that explicitly before. But I would just tweak it just a little. The question, which for the sake of perhaps illuminating my point, which is that does the office of man need? Would the office of man be satisfied? Because it's not so much that there's a deficiency in the occupants of the office. There's a deficiency in the office itself. Which is a different, you know what I'm saying? That's a different, because men are basically aspiring to align with the character required for office. But if the office inherently has deficiencies, then that's a different conversation. We're not talking about deficiencies of individuals. We're talking about deficiencies of office. Kind of like how we have the three branches, right? Because any one of them by themselves is deficient.
the judicial, legislative, what's the third one? Executive branch, yeah.
Exactly. So in a similar way, the office of man in of itself is deficient. And that's
Oh,
why we need
okay.
a complementary office, not a complementary person, but a complementary office.
Oh, I would say that that's a good. I think that distinction. I think that's not understood enough. I would say that we do look at the person. I would say it seems by and large we look at the person as male, as men, women. We don't look at office. So I think that that's a good point to bring that distinction. So how would you phrase that? Just the like, are you saying like as far as the title, would you put like almost like men versus the office of men? Or almost like, or what if you, okay, like you said, the branches of government, almost like human government, basically. Instead of civic, like what we have, it'd be like human government. Okay, what's needed for human government? Like, or human government, office of man, office of woman, like even something like that, maybe. Let's discuss, or like, let's, you know.
I kind of like that one. You jot that down. I think you worded it. Human government.
You putting it in the Skype?
No, I'm just writing it down somewhere else. I put human government colon the office of man versus the office of woman. Where I have the word office and man and woman capitalized.